Hello, everybody.
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. Hello, everybody. One and all, welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today, because today we are going into a whole new world of Game of Thrones television. Today is the day. We are literally here. It is in the late hours of the night, Sunday night. Episode 1 of House of the Dragon has just premiered. We just finished watching it. We're coming off of that experience, and we haven't even talked about the episode yet with each other. We figured let's get our first reactions out on the air, and that's what we're here to do today.
Yeah, this is a rare opportunity. You're getting completely fresh Dylan and Charles with no idea what the other person even thought at all.
Right.
Because, I mean, when we're reading one of these long books, there's going to be a little bit of exchange of text. We save the juicy stuff for the podcast, of course, for you wonderful listeners. But here, I don't even know if Charles liked it. I don't know anything. So I'm excited to hear his thoughts and just looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. It's an interesting era for Friends Talking Fantasy and the fantasy television world because, I don't know, Game of Thrones was just a huge influence for us, the show and the books. But I think it was really the show that kind of inflamed our passions for fantasy. Those early seasons are unlike anything I've ever experienced in popular culture. I know, Dylan, you feel a similar way. And now here we are, so many years later, experiencing House of the Dragon. It's a Game of Thrones prequel, if you will, a story taking place 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones, and it's good to be back. I'll say I'm excited to be back in the world of Game of Thrones. New Game of Thrones content.
I agree wholeheartedly, Charles, and you know, we got to get into the true spoiler-filled discussion of this, I think. So I'm going to give my spoiler warning. If you haven't yet, watch that first episode of House of the Dragon, this Game of Thrones prequel show. Then now's a perfect time to go do that. Just an hour or so of your time, and then you can come right back here and get our fresh takes right off watching it ourselves. But anyway, if you haven't, now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones.
Well said, Dylan. Now's the time because we are going to embark on our episode 1 spoiler-filled discussion of the House of the Dragon. And, I mean, first impressions right out of the bat, I had fun watching it. I thought it was very well done, tastefully done, and I'm looking forward to more.
I agree. I was captivated, Charles. You know, sometimes you watch a show, especially at the first episode or something like that, and you're getting that urge to like reach for your phone or something just to do something else. I usually know I'm enjoying a show, and I try to give the shows, no matter, even if I'm getting that feeling, you know, I don't go grab the phone. I try to give first episodes of shows a chance. But this was a show where I was not getting that urge. I was definitely invested in what was happening. I was feeling like I needed to pay close attention and all of that. So that's always a good sign, just first impression wise. When I come off a show, I'm like, oh yeah, that just kind of happened, and I never really questioned the fact that I was just watching this and kind of lost myself in the show.
Well said, Dylan. I agree. I think this show had the very difficult task of following up and having to live up to the expectations of Game of Thrones. And say what you want about how Game of Thrones ended, everyone knows Game of Thrones. The pop culture sensation was so strong and so beloved, and to step back into that world is a bold undertaking. And I thought they nailed it. 200 years. I guess is not that much time in Game of Thrones time, because things look pretty similar, but you're going back to King's Landing, you're seeing the dragons, you're seeing everything, and it's like we never left from a setting perspective and from a production value perspective. So I think that plays a huge part in my mind of how captivating the show was. It's so rare we get to just see a fully rich world, and like I was able to dive right into it where we left off from Game of Thrones, and that in itself I think is just a huge accomplishment for this show.
Totally agree. During that moment where you just see the dragon flying over King's Landing and you've got the Game of Thrones music in the background, I'm not gonna lie, the part of me that is so nostalgic for those early seasons of Game of Thrones and how excited it made me about the fantasy genre, I was nerding out a little bit. And it's just, like you're saying earlier, Charles, it just felt good to be back. And there's a little bit of this sense, almost like that giant Balerion the Dread skull just looming over this show, meaning that Game of Thrones, the original show, is like that giant dragon skull just staring down on it with all of the pressure and all of the weight of that. And you can feel that at times with the show. I even felt it, especially the way that they start, where it's like, oh, it gives you that kind of text on the screen, right?
Right.
And it's like, oh, this is during Viserys' rule or whatever, and it's like 172 years before the birth of Daenerys Targaryen.
Right.
And then like part of the text just fades away and all that's left is 172 years before the birth of Daenerys Targaryen. And it's like, okay, like Daenerys isn't in the show. Like you don't have to make the show all of it relative to Daenerys. We know she's this legendary character in TV history now, and Emilia Clarke did such an incredible job playing her. But I don't know. It was one of those moments where I was a little scared because I was like, are they going to make this its own thing, or is this just going to be one of those like
I kind of get it. I mean, you kind of like, this was the thing that happened to Game of Thrones. It's like all of a sudden you go from producing content for a niche audience in season 1 to the masses of 14 million plus live viewers towards the end, and then I think you've got this show feeling that responsibility to be like, we can't just confuse people thinking like, how does this relate to Game of Thrones? If I'm just a casual viewer who's not really read the books but liked the shows and is coming back into it, it's like, what is this? It's like, oh, before Daenerys. Okay, I got it. I'm here. And it doesn't dwell on it for too long. To me, it's the scene at the end where King Viserys is talking about like the Song of Ice and Fire. I'm like, bro, that's not for another 200 years. Like, we can...
I had this... Charles, I'm sorry, I had the same exact reaction. I was like, I was going to bring that up on the pod too. I was like, I don't really need this as the motivation for, and this is what prequels just struggle with all the time, right? Is like, you know what's going to happen. So when it's like, oh, her motivation needs to be that she holds this secret about how the Targaryens have to unite everyone, and it's going to be a White Walker fest out there. It's like, everyone in here is going to be long dead by that point. Daenerys will not know that secret that's being passed down for generations because of, you know, what happened to her family and that she was in exile. So this secret has been passed down from heir to heir. It's like, it doesn't matter. And we know it doesn't matter. So why is that the motivation here? It's very strange. Yeah.
I mean, I appreciated like the lore being built. It's like, I'm passing down one of these secrets, like a transfer of power thing. It's like, here's the king's secrets that you need to know. This is going to happen one day. But it was just presented in such a dramatic, like huge way right at the end of the episode. And you're like, okay, like I see what they're doing, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And it's like you said, Dylan, the prequel struggle here is real. I also think it kind of reminded me of Star Wars in a way where it's like you kind of have to write carefully. There's continuity stuff now and lore stuff that you feel beholden to delivering on. And how do you tell a story in that same universe that's already beloved by fans but tell a new story separate from that? And I think the show, apart from those two scenes at the beginning and the end, the bookends, I thought they did a very good job of totally separating themselves from a Game of Thrones and telling their own story, and it wasn't beholden on anyone. There was only a very brief, like, Stark cameo, and, you know, it was, like, very, very small. It wasn't like, oh...
Rickon action, right?
It's like, I would like you to meet Rickon Stark, and, you know, it's like this whole... like dramatic motif plays and everything. It's like, no. It didn't go that route at all. This show intends to stand on its own as its own story, and I think it's going to pull it off. I respect the move.
Yeah, I think so too. I do want to note that when Viserys said it's called A Song of Ice and Fire, it's like the guy might as well have looked to the camera and winked. It was like so cheesy.
It was.
I was like, don't do that. Yeah,
they hammed it up way too hard.
Right, but I am with you, Charles. It seems like they're trying to ground themselves in this family and their drama within it, in the characters and their relationships to each other, even just things like the Hand the King, Lord Hightower, and his relationship and rivalry with Daemon Targaryen. And it's, you know, and now we've got this situation where it looks like we're going to get Daemon up against our new heir to the throne, and the first ever woman to be heir to the throne, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. So it's like that kind of, you know, family rivalry and the drama between the people, that's going to be the center of this show, more so than this the world is on the line type thing that Game of Thrones was centered around. And, you know, and that's why it does feel like it falls a little bit flat where they end it with the, like, and the world is on the line. It's like, no, it's not for a while. So,
right.
Yeah, let's...
Your world, maybe.
Most of the show,
But...
most of the show stayed grounded in the characters, their relationships.
I agree.
That's what this is going to have to do.
You nailed it, Dylan. It's like they spent this whole episode... They did a really great job establishing that, look, this is a patriarchal society and there's a clear dichotomy between the expectations of men and women in royalty, and it builds that up really well. There's the parallel between the tournament and then the queen giving birth, and there's all these things going on with Princess Rhaenyra and her relationship with her father, and it's all paralleled very well, explored very well, executed very well, and then just to end it with A Song of Ice and Fire is coming is a prophecy. It's like, what are you talking about, bro? But I mean, to bring it back here, is this show is really about the inciting incident of this show. In Game of Thrones, it was when the Hand of the King died suddenly and unexpectedly, right? And now in this one, it's naming Princess Rhaenyra as the heir apparent to the throne, which is, and at this moment, is a very controversial move for royalty.
Oh yeah, definitely, and it's interesting because how this all plays out. If you're familiar with the Targaryen family tree, you definitely have some spoilers that are gonna play out, you know, the line of succession stuff, and I won't get into any of that. It was something that I definitely was way more into back in the day when Game of Thrones was going strong. Now heyday. I hardly remember any of it. Yeah, I hardly remember any of it, but there's certain things that I know like won't happen or will, you know, those kind of things. So it's interesting in that sense, but this is groundbreaking territory for the world of A Song of Ice and Fire and Westeros, that we have a woman being named the heir to the throne. It, as I mentioned in the episode, had never been done before, and we also saw a very, I don't know if easy is the right word, but a very easy opportunity for a woman to be named the heir at the beginning of the episode during the sort of prologue scene, and she is denied the throne. That's the queen that never was. I believe it's Rhaenys. Targaryen.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough with these Targaryen names, 'cause, right? You're
didn't
trying
give it a
to
little spin
balance
on them.
Rhaenyra, Rhaenys is like it's a lot going on. But anyway, it's it's definitely a contrast. The beginning of the episode where a woman is denied that opportunity because of the patriarchal society, and then the end of the episode, you have a woman being granted that opportunity in this momentous occasion.
Yeah, and that's played really well. Like you said, it started with the prologue, which clearly indicated that no one by popular vote would have voted a woman to be sit on the Iron Throne. And then now that King Viserys basically had no other option, because even he, throughout this whole thing, was so adamant about having a son and putting a son on the throne and all of this. It was only when he had no other cards left to play, and after Prince Daemon kind of slighted him, that he decided to make this choice. It didn't happen until the very last minute, so you wonder how convicted King Viserys was. But I thought that last scene with the dragon skull there in the chamber was, I thought he played it very sincere, so I believe him. But, it took his whole world crashing down on him and him to run out of all other options before he could see his own daughter as a suitable heir to the throne. And I think that was an important part of this episode and their relationship, was to establish that.
Totally agreed. And I think that what I'm getting from Daenerys is actually along lines of what Prince Daemon Targaryen told him, which is he's not a strong king. He's actually pretty weak from what I can gather. And he's not, I don't think it's even that he was looking to keep down Rhaenyra or anything like that. I think that he just isn't one to think to go against convention or to do things differently. He's just not a strong leader. And this kind of got thrust upon him when he was already an adult. He's just not prepared for this. And he's making the best of all of it. I do think he was being sincere in that moment in front of the dragon skull as well.
Yeah, you get those moments where Viserys is talking to, like, the Hand of the King, for example, Sir Otto Hightower, and it's like, it was your idea to make him the captain of the City Watch, or it's like, you're the king, though, bro. Like, what are you doing? And then his wife is in labor, and he's just desperately looking to the Grand Maester for answers and all these other things. You could tell he's not like this dominating, decisive presence. You could very much tell that he is like a peacetime king for all intents and purposes. Like, he hasn't been challenged too much. But he does a pretty good job, I suppose. Nothing crazy's happened yet. We'll see in the aftermath of naming his daughter the heir apparent here. But for now, I'm okay with King Viserys. It's the character of Prince Daemon that I had a hard time getting my pulse on this character. I enjoyed the character very much, but I was like, is this guy the bad guy? Is he compassionate? I think the answer is it's just a complicated family relationship, which is what makes all the relationships in Game of Thrones, and I can see them building here in House of the Dragon, pay off very well. What is your read on Prince Daemon, Dylan?
Yeah, I don't know if he's just a straightforward villain or bad guy, but I do think he's the antagonist. Mm-hmm. And he is, he's got some of these like Oberyn vibes, just in like he's portrayed as very like lecherous, but he's also got some of these Jaime Lannister vibes. There's that moment where he's like sitting on the Iron Throne, and I think about how when Jaime first, I assume, well, this actually happened before the events of Game of Thrones, but Jaime was there sitting on the Iron Throne when Ned Stark came in after Robert's rebellion. So those kind of things, he gives me those kind of vibes of like the morally gray character, but at least at first is leaning toward being a bad guy, which is where Jaime was definitely at the start of the show. He's very well portrayed by Matt Smith. Like, I think he did an incredible job. Like, he's very charismatic and just compelling. Like, when he's on screen, he makes you take notice, I think, more than any other actor is making you take notice of their character. So
yeah,
props to Matt Smith for the portrayal. He's an interesting character, and I do think he's going to be the antagonist from here on out.
He does draw you in, the performance. You don't know what you're going to get. Like, is this a moment where he's going to just fight a guy to the death? Is this a moment where he's going to show compassion towards his niece? It's hard to say. And he also, unlike King Viserys, he's willing to act swiftly and with conviction. It's when he takes over the City Watch, he gets all these men to rally to his cause, and he's got 2,000 armed soldiers that are devoted to him, and he built them up from nothing, and he went out and enforced the king's law on all these criminals very violently at the beginning of the episode. It continues to promise on Game of Thrones tradition of gore and blood and guts, which is great. So that all happened in those scenes. And
yeah, I could have done without at least one part of that.
I know the scene,
the quote unquote raper. I probably could have done without, but
yeah. Cut to that gif of Roose Bolton with the sausage.
Oh God, yeah. So it was interesting. It was a kind of weird scene, just the transition from him being like, we're gonna show them, and then they're just out, it seems like, killing people with reckless abandon.
Yeah.
And it's only later you kind of get the like, these were thieves and stuff, and we're taking hands of thieves.
Yeah, I was very confused because like the way the scene is shot, it looks like they're just walking up on the town and just beating up on anyone they could get their hands on. It's like, how do these guards know who's a criminal and who isn't? Is this just like a square where all the people are criminals? And it's like, how did you know he was this criminal and he was that criminal?
Yeah.
I mean, I get that it was probably they didn't know and they just butchered a bunch of people, but yeah, I was left a little bit confused as to like the extent of how clueless they were. Do they just empty out the prisons?
They were supposed to be clueless.
Yeah.
The way that because during the scene with the small council, they weren't like, you killed all these innocent people. They were like, that's not a good way to go about killing criminals.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really make sense when you think about that they're just running up behind people and like attacking them. It's like, how'd you know that guy was
in the late hours of the night? It's just guards grabbing whoever they could get their hands on and beating them up. It's like, okay, I think we needed a little more information before the attack so that we knew what was happening here, because it just looks like just beat up on a bunch of random poor citizens of King's Landing. But the High Council seemed to think that they were all criminals, which was also confusing. But King Viserys was flip-flopping that whole time. He's like, it was your idea. Well, maybe it's a good thing. Well, it's your idea. Well, a good presence might help crack things down. Morality's been pretty low. Maybe beating up a bunch of random people will prove that. It's like, okay, whatever you want, King Viserys. Maybe it will. I'm sure people are thrilled.
Oh, yeah. Well, I do think it goes to show that Viserys, he doesn't really have his finger on the pulse of the council, of the city, of really anything that's going on. It seems like the guy's just been obsessed with trying to get a male heir. And all he seems to be thinking about is, okay, my wife's in labor. For some reason, I'm entirely convinced it's going to be a boy. Mm-hmm. And I'm like crapping on the maesters for not being willing to tell me that it's a boy.
Yeah, and I'm planning this whole...
have no way of knowing.
I'm bringing all of the kingdom to this tournament before the baby's even born. It's like a great idea. Yeah. I mean, like you said, he's...
I don't want to count your chickens before they hatch.
Exactly. He's too busy worrying about a male heir and worrying about his scale model of King's Landing. That scenery is like clay carving. Yeah, I think that's taken him a very long time up in his castle alone, whittling clay into... kind of hard to figure out what's going on in the streets when you're busy doing that. But
it's good to have hobbies.
Sure. But he calls...
Even a king needs hobbies, Charles.
And you know what? It looks very impressive. Like, it would be funny if it was bad, but it actually looks pretty darn good.
So you got to better than Joffrey would have.
Yeah, definitely. Joffrey's only hobby was to torture people. But you brought up the tournament, and that is a very interesting scene that I think we need to devote some time to. King Viserys calls the tournament prematurely before they even know the sex of the child. The queen is still in labor, but he's called this tournament, and this was, to me, a very ambitious scene. Again, they had the dragons right out of the gate, which I thought was awesome. Also ambitious. But now they're doing this huge jousting tournament, and it went on for quite a while, and they had multiple joust fights, and the scene did a really good job of showing kind of the rivalries and unrest amongst all the houses represented in the joust. I thought it was a very clever scene to, one, keep us entertained by actually showing us some action, and two, showing us that this is a nation on the precipice of, like, they're just at each other's throats. And I thought for a first episode, coming right out of the gate, very good example of showing over telling there. I greatly appreciated those scenes.
Well said. And the scenes look good.
Beautiful.
They were interesting, right? And it was exciting. Mm-hmm. I felt like, even just watching the joust with Daemon, and you get a sense, another show don't tell moment. You get a sense of Daemon's character where he swipes out the horse's legs.
Yeah.
And you're like, this guy will do whatever it takes. He's got some of that Machiavellianism, and you get the reaction of the crowd, just like this scattered applause, and he just doesn't care. He's just out there doing what it takes to win. And that's a great way of showing his ambition. And you can see he's also, like,
particularly targeting the House of Hightower to try and provoke the Hand of the King, who's also of the Hightower family. You know, everything is calculated, and he's a bit conniving too. He's a bit of a schemer, but you know, that's a good show of his character.
He's got a little finger in him too.
A little, yeah.
Like, that's. Yeah, not quite at that level, but you can tell it's some of that ambition, and he's got this attitude where he's going to do what it takes to get himself on top, and sometimes that is causing some chaos, and it's definitely about pissing off Otto Hightower, although some of it he seems to just enjoy. Like,
antagonizing.
He definitely likes antagonizing Otto, and he asked for the favor of Otto's daughter, all this stuff. So you get the sense that he's just messing with him. But we get an interesting scene where he's going up against Sir Criston Cole.
Yes.
And Criston Cole, you see, has been dominating in the joust, taking out Baratheons like it's nothing.
Yep.
And
good Baratheon shout out.
He does. Yeah, it is fun, right?
Getting the Provoctor as well, because doesn't the Baratheon champion go to I forget her name, but the one who was not, who lost the
queen that never was.
The queen that never was.
I do think it's Rhaenys, but
because that's what Baratheon says. I would love the favor of the queen who never was. And then the king's just sitting there like, this is cool. It's like, bro, what are you doing?
Wait, he was still there at that moment? He hadn't left because of the labor?
Yeah, he was still there. He was still there.
Okay.
Because that was like
there's other moments where I was like, look, like, Robert Baratheon wasn't the strongest king. You know, maybe physically he was up there, but in terms of his presence, he wasn't the strongest king. Mm-hmm. But even he, when crap started to go crazy at the tournaments, he'd be like, all right, enough. Like, this needs to stop. And he would keep things under control. At this tournament, there's just people beating each other to death with shields. And I know at that point, Viserys was gone for the labor, but it's just like, there was no sense of control at this point in the... and it goes to show that this guy does not have the strongest fist when it comes to ruling. If Robert Baratheon has better, like, control over violence than you do, that's not a great sign. Because Robert, remember when, like, the Mount and the Hound were going at it? Robert was, like, kind of really into that. This is one of the early episodes of Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah.
He was like,
a great
when
joust.
they're going at it after. Yeah, and it's kind of cool. You can tell Robert, as a fan of fighting, was like, ooh, I kind of want to see who wins this one. But he was like, this is my kingdom. I have to keep it under control. So he stops it.
He does.
Meanwhile, Viserys isn't even there, and people feel free just bashing each other to death.
How many
shields,
champion warriors, important members of households were just at their heads bashed in over nothing at this tournament because Viserys wasn't there? And let's be real, Robert would never miss a tournament for something like the birth of one of his children.
Well, he wasn't there.
Yeah, exactly.
That was like a big thing that like Cersei was pissed at, not because a tournament was going on, but he went hunting. Right?
Yes,
that he wasn't there during the birth. So it was like his tradition to go hunting during it. So if hunting gets his attention over it, the tournament would never keep him, or the birth would never keep him from witnessing the tournament. So.
Never.
But at least he'd be keeping under
to his
control.
credit, when he heard things were going south, he made an appearance. And this is one of the more intense, interesting moments of the show, where they parallel the queen giving birth to the real gore fest of the joust. Although I think it was a bit more gory in the birthing room than anywhere else in this season.
Right. Well, this harkens back to the line by the woman giving birth in that moment where she says, hey, the birthing room is our battlefield. So
she says, the child bed is our battlefield.
Okay.
We must learn to face it with a stiff lip. The moment she said that, I typed it out on a notes thing on my phone. I'm like, that's going to be important later. Like, I just knew when they said it. Yeah. And how right was I when that happened? You could just tell they were building up to something crazy with this whole, very much around femininity and patriarchal society stuff happening. So at that point, I just started keeping track of it. And yeah, the child bed is our battlefield. We must learn to face it with a stiff lip. That was the line. And then here we are on the battlefield.
Good job taking that down. Yeah, so that's Queen Aemma Arryn, and she's having a rough time when she's giving birth, and we end up with this moment where the Grand Maester pulls aside Viserys and basically gets across, she's gonna die no matter what, but if we act now, it seems like it was basically a C-section, right?
Right.
They just didn't have the technology at that point to actually have a person survive a C-section.
He said a father must make the impossible choice. It's like, the father has to make it? Interesting. Maybe the mother has no agency
in
this.
Not her. Not the... Right. Exactly. And it does go into these themes of a patriarchal society. I feel like this is going to be a central theme to the entire show. And they do get at it with that, it's the father's choice what happens to this woman's body. It's and obviously relevant to a lot of things going on currently in the U.S. So I'm sure they weren't thinking about that at the time of...
I'm sure they filmed that like a year ago or something, but it's very topical today.
Yeah. So it's it's a very strange scene, too, because I was watching it. It's hard to watch, and it's obviously supposed to be hard to watch, where she's, they're like, hey, the blood loss is going to kill her, and they're just about to cut into her, and he's like, hey, don't be scared.
Yeah.
And, and I was just like, watching this, I was just trying not to scream, get this woman some milk of the poppy.
Yeah.
Am I right? Like, what is going on? Why are they cutting? Obviously, it's all terrible that this is even happening to begin with and that the man is choosing what happens. But once that's done, why does she have to be awake for this? That felt like it was a choice for the show to make this gruesome scene, but it actually made no logical sense when we know that milk of the poppy is a thing from the original Game of Thrones.
They mentioned milk of the poppy being like, we gave her as much as we were willing to without affecting the child. Yes, they said there was a line. It's like, we've given her as much milk of the poppy as we can. They said that very early on. But to your credit, they could still have who
Gotta
even
do something.
mercy killer, even anything would be better than being like disemboweled alive and fully conscious. Like that's just a horrible fate for anybody. It's like
if they gave her more milk of the poppy right then, is it so quick acting on the child that like before they'd be able to cut into her and take out the kid, it would already mess the kid up? I don't know.
Maybe they already gave him too much milk of the poppy. That poor kid.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, that's a seg toward what happens with the kid. Is there more you want to say on the birthing scene?
Not really. That was definitely the hardest scene to watch, and there was a lot of challenging scenes in the show. There was all kinds of violence, but that one, the betrayal, the like screaming in pain, it was very, very intense, and it's definitely a moment that makes you uncomfortable as a viewer. But
one
go
more
for
thing. Her moving around and all that during the C-section, that had to be worse for the kid than giving her more milk of the poppy.
Oh,
that's my last milk of the poppy take.
Yeah.
But there's no way, right? She's like, rightfully so, she's like trying to get out of this situation and she's squirming and all this stuff. But I mean, these maesters, they don't know what they're doing.
No way, no shot. Yeah, they just straight up butchered her and then lost the child. It's all a crapshoot. And yeah, Viserys just kind of accepts it. I have a hard time accepting. I'm like, did something happen? Like, what's going on here? This is all very confusing. They at least show the baby like stops like crying, starts coughing in the maester's arms. Like they did show some of that, which I think was important that they did that, because otherwise I'd be like, I'm not just going to believe that this very important male baby just suddenly and unexpectedly died, so at least they did show some of that. But I mean, that's all I have to say.
That felt like it still felt abrupt.
Yeah,
that they basically had that part where the baby was kind of showing a little bit of signs that maybe all was not well, but I don't know, like a baby coughing right after, is that right? I don't know. I'm no like neonatal expert here, but I'll say then all of a sudden, she's just like at the funeral for the mom, and she says, "Oh, I hope that those few hours that my brother was alive were the happiest of my father's life."
It's that's a good line.
That's how you're revealing that But it's like, wait, that's how you're revealing that?
Well, they showed the small body all bundled up. So that was the implication. I think that happened first before there was dialogue. Okay. But I can't remember.
I thought.
Yeah, it was abrupt.
You're probably right, because I know they did show the pyre. But you're right. That was like the scene changed to just looking at the pyre. So yeah, but it's still kind of weirdly done. I felt like it was abrupt.
Yeah, Viserys just accepted it very quickly and moved on very quickly. But the show's not really about all that stuff anyway. Viserys is not like a schemer. He's also not paranoid, really. So the fact that he can just accept that and move on is nothing that I'm going to get too crazy over. But the funeral itself was a rare moment.
Oh, what? You think
what?
Like the kid being poisoned or something like that would be something that another... a more paranoid king might be thinking.
I think a more paranoid king would probably like kill all the like bed nurses and the maester and be like, it's your fault, you're all out to get me. The
Mad King would have burned them all.
Exactly.
Viserys, say what you want about Viserys. He's not the strongest king, it seems like, but he is even keeled.
Yes.
And maybe if all of this heir stuff wasn't going so awry and he could just be a peacetime king, maybe things would have gone really well. Maybe that's the kind of presence that you need. But obviously at the start of this show, you see all this trouble brewing and he doesn't feel like the man for the job.
Exactly. Things are getting a little bit complicated. He's a bit out of his depth, but he sees some promise in Princess Rhaenyra. But during the funeral scene, there's some interesting things that happen. One, it's Rhaenyra that musters the courage to speak Dracarys to light the pyre, not Viserys. And
Right.
it was Prince Daemon that was like, yo, your dad needs you. You should do something. Like, he's waiting for you. Like, go now. And like a rare moment of compassion from Prince Daemon that, you know, we were seeing him being a conniving cheat at the tournament, and now here he is being like, you should go with your dad. He needs you right now. I like it. It's a good thing for you to do.
Yeah, he basically has two moments of compassion, and both are with Rhaenyra, right? There's the first scene where he's giving her the necklace, and he seems like he really cares about her, and then this moment at the funeral. So it does seem like he holds some legitimate affinity for his niece. It's just now his niece is in the way of him getting the crown, so we'll see where that goes.
Exactly. That's kind of where we're left. The line of succession was made because Prince Daemon can't help himself but celebrate in a debaucherous way the death of this baby, where it's like, bro, read the room. You couldn't have waited like a week to throw your debaucherous party. I guess he just...
The problem is he did read that room. He read the room full of the debaucherous party and his Kingsguard, and everyone wanted him to make a big show of him still being the heir. He didn't read the larger room that was his family and the overall sense of what was going on in King's Landing, but he kind of got, I guess, peer pressured into it a little bit. Everyone was telling him to make a speech, and he steps up and he says, heir for a day, right? Is that the line? Did you write that down?
Heir for
Charles?
a day, yeah.
Yes. And that's savage,
Yeah,
right? We've got
so
the queen that never was. We've got heir for a day. It's... People are really throwing around those nicknames, and they cut pretty hard. That's a tough one.
Exactly. And it's a poor play because obviously word gets to Otto Hightower, who of course goes straight to the king and is like, did you know that Daemon said these things about your short-lived son? And of course Viserys, he very rarely makes a decisive decision out of emotion, but here he is right away having no problems. Because he went to the bat for Damien multiple times when a lot of the court was trying to scheme him not to, of like, he's kind of a loose cannon, he's amassing power, he's a bit confident and a bit overconfident, and you can't necessarily trust him. And Viserys is like, what are you talking about? He's my brother. Like, he's cool. He's chill. And then it was the disrespect of his late son that finally sold him on this whole thing. And, you know, Viserys might not have been wrong. Like, would it have been the worst thing to keep Daemon as the heir apparent and transferred succession? Like, probably not. I don't think Daemon would have necessarily gone out to overthrow his brother. Maybe he would have just started acting like he was the king and stepping over Viserys all the time, but who isn't in that court?
Well, it's the same situation that they were in before.
Right.
And the same situation that they would have been in if this was a girl instead of a boy and everyone lived. Daemon had been the heir apparent for a while. They just kept trying to have kids, and it was kind of figured that eventually he would. But so, I mean, they would be in the same situation if Viserys just, you know, took his time to grieve or whatever, and then married someone else and tried for another heir while Daemon is the heir apparent. He just couldn't take the really messed up, I guess, like celebration of the death of his family that Daemon engaged in. It really revealed a lot about Daemon's character, and I don't think Viserys was worried that Daemon was gonna kill him or something. He thought that was really messed up and spoke to his character.
Exactly. It's the fact that you've got all of the council whispering in his ear combined with his recent losses that incited him to do this. Nothing would have changed in any other situation. So it just got really messy. And what I like about this conflict is that there's no like person who's necessarily wrong in all of this. Like there's no evil person. It's like Daemon was promised the crown by all rights. The way their patriarchal society works, he still has a claim to the throne. And so to not feel super slighted and disappointed and embarrassed and all these other things, you can't blame him too much for that. And then you have Viserys, who also is like, here's a guy who just took 2,000 people, went out and killed a bunch of maybe criminals in the city, and then is saying all this horrible stuff about my family and the worst part of my life. It's like, is this someone I want to pass down when I have a perfectly good daughter right here? So like, there's no wrong answers here. What we don't know is what people outside of the king's court feel. And I think we're going to see more of that in the coming episodes, because I'd be curious to know, when Rickon Stark is pledging his allegiance, is he really supporting this idea, or is he scheming? Are the Baratheons, you could tell they were kind of begrudgingly...
I don't know if Rickon Stark, if he's got that Stark blood, is much of a schemer, honestly. But
right.
I get what you're saying. The larger point of how are the lords of the other kingdoms, or the other lords of the Seven Kingdoms, how are they feeling about this shift away from their patriarchal society to name a queen the heir? That's something that I'm sure a lot of these more traditional lords are going to have reactions to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be part of what our protagonist in Rhaenyra, she's going to have to deal with.
For sure. I definitely think that's the huge kickoff moment, is we're going to find out. And it's going to be a real dicey situation for Rhaenyra to navigate. And it's, what's interesting with Viserys, when he did cast out Daemon, did you catch that moment where as soon as Daemon turned around and walked away, Viserys was cut himself on the Iron Throne?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, this is obviously foreshadowing the fact that by making this decision, he just set off this chain of events that's not going to end too well for him, probably, at least get bloody.
Fire and blood. Got dragons. Yeah, he's got that red dragon that he rode off on, and we've got, obviously, Rhaenyra has her own dragon, and I don't know. We've got the prologue where she says the only thing that could destroy House Targaryen is itself, something along those lines, and we know this is going to be some Civil War action. It's just got to be based on all the foreshadowing here.
Exactly. And to King Viserys' credit, he does say to Daemon that, look, the throne is the most dangerous seat there is, and you have to be ready for that. And this is a huge burden. And, by the way, the Cold North is coming. It's a secret. It's good luck with it.
It was also, okay, a lot of that scene was kind of corny, because it's also corny for him to be like, you've ridden on a dragon, but the most dangerous seat is the Iron Throne.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, all right, Viserys. Like, just say what you gotta say. You don't have to make a big scene about all of this. And I will say, though, I really liked how everyone was telling her at the beginning of the show that she smelled like a dragon. Because I just think it's like a funny thing that, we've had all these scenes with Daenerys riding dragons, and no one's ever commented on something like that, but after they start bringing it up, I was like, yeah, I bet dragons do smell bad. And right? Like, at least they probably have some sort of charcoal to them. They're also, like, probably dirty. I don't think they're bathing a lot, anything like that. So I like the idea that it's like someone who just got off a horse, and you're like, ooh, you smell like dragon.
Yeah, exactly. Because you smell like horse all the time. That's a very common quip. We hear it on The Witcher a bunch. But, to smell like dragon. And, you got to wonder what that's like.
And it also kind of speaks to how commonplace the dragons are at this point, where people are just, I know it's mostly like a one-off joke, but it also sets a stage where it's like people are aware of the smell of dragon because there's just like 10 dragons around in this kingdom, and it's not unusual for a Targaryen to just be off riding a dragon like it's nothing. When in the Game of Thrones original showtime, the fact that dragons even existed was such a big deal. No one was like, the familiar smell of dragon in the morning. Now he's got like probably like dragon candles, all this stuff going around. Well, because dragons are so common.
I know. I like that they have the dragon wranglers. It's these two guys, an older guy and a younger guy, and they're all like covered in soot, and they've got their big sticks. You know, there's already some like little background character work going on with them that I thought was kind of funny. So, all in all, what can I say? Great. Promising kickoff. I mean, is it a Game of Thrones season 1, episode 1? I don't know if anything ever will be. That ending, I was like, I need to watch episode 2 immediately. This was like, oh, I'll see what happens next week. So. Oh,
yeah. I mean, I'm definitely tuning in next week. I think it did more than enough to catch my interest. And, I think they played it a little bit safe, but I think they had to. And this is like Targaryens, and they're playing the same music, and they're giving you these glory shots of King's Landing, and I think that in those ways, little bit safe. Yeah. Giving us all these small council scenes, right? It's a little like, you liked all this, didn't you?
Yeah.
And part of what I would like to see, new cast of characters, but here we go with one of these small council scenes. They're really getting snappy with each other with this banter. It's like, okay, I mean, there are no Littlefinger, Varys types in there. It's not quite the same. But all in all, great episode, and excited to see where this goes. And also excited for the idea that there's going to be more Game of Thrones Ice and Fire content coming our way. And maybe
it's good to see that this show was up to the task production value-wise. Yeah. Like, it brought me right back. Like, I was totally convinced I was in the same King's Landing as Game of Thrones. I was in the same world as Game of Thrones. The continuity was, from a setting, visualization perspective, production value perspective, absolutely nailed. So I know it's new showrunners, it's many years later. It can be a hard thing to kind of recapture that magic, but maybe they got a similar team together or something, because it looks like it could very well be just a continuation of this show as it was. So in that respect, I'm very relieved and very excited.
For sure. And here's what I'll say, Charles. If this was bad, and we're fresh off of this. We have no idea how the public is receiving this. So maybe we wake up tomorrow and we're the only ones who liked it. But if this was bad, I think people would turn so quickly on this show, just because they're still kind of at wit's end, even though Game of Thrones ended a while back with how poorly executed that ending was and how much people didn't like it. If this first episode came out bad, this show would be done. Like, no one would even be tuning in for episode 2. And it would be a laughing stock. See. Maybe I'll eat my words, but I got the sense this is something that people probably will enjoy if they were Game of Thrones fans for the original. And I think a lot of people will be tuning in next week and for the rest of this season. And for that, you just have to give it up to them, assuming I'm not wrong.
For sure. I'll be tuning in. At this point, I'd recommend this episode to Game of Thrones fans, no problem. And there's even a fantasy fan, like, you're not going to get this kind of wonderful production value. Like you said, Dylan, this like engrossing show, even one episode, it's like you're just not going to get that most places. It's such a hard thing to pull off in fantasy television. And it sets a very strong precedent for the season. I'm excited to see where all the conflict starts to arise, how the politics kind of shows you their cards and plays out. I'm very interested in, and maybe we'll get a fun battle scene or two. But for now, very strong, solid ground, strong foundation for the show.
Yeah, and lays a strong foundation for us to keep talking about the show as it keeps going. I'm sure we'll be bringing you more content about House of the Dragon moving forward. But move forward we must, because we're getting close to that hour, Charles. And I don't think, I think it's almost rude of us if we make an episode of FTF that's longer than the actual episode that we're talking about.
Have so much
House
to analyze and unpack and deconstruct. No. You're right, Dylan. We've said more than enough about this episode today. Fun day for fantasy fans to have another Game of Thrones show out in the world. And definitely going to be tuning in next week, 9:01 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. But until then, guys, we will talk to you later. I'm sure we'll have all kinds of other content interspersed throughout this House of the Dragon stuff. We're still reading books and all that. For sure. And
next week we have a book coming your way that we're very excited about.
Yes. And we already recorded that, and I thought it was a really great discussion. I'm excited to share that with you, the listeners.
Me too.
But you know what I'm excited to share? That sweet outro music. You got it. What do you say?
Get it? Get that sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right. Thank you all so much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, do us a favor and give us a shout out over on social media. That's Instagram at the FTF Podcast and Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. Now, if you like what you heard today and you want to support the show even further beyond social media, Dylan, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, and you have the option to do that on either Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, where most of you folks are listening to us. So it's super easy over on Spotify. It's right there at the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy feed, and throwing us 5 stars does so much to help us. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Just listening, you've already done more than enough. Thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.